This is the blending modes demo, and I'm going to show you a bunch of different things, different techniques and features and combinations of blending mode techniques. But first I'd like to start with a drawing that I brought in from my files. It's a character from my book, and this is really good to know both when you're painting in Illustrator, or scanning a drawing in, or doing a drawing in Illustrator and trying to add some texture, and for just importing your own drawings, like hand drawings on paper, and putting a different texture behind them, or making the paper look a little distressed or crinkled or aged. So what you want to do is you bring up your file. It can go right on the background, which is usually the first layer that comes up, of course. And then what you want to do next is find a parchment texture, sort of like this, or some sort of like tea-stained paper, something that looks a little tarnished or aged. And you can download a lot of these for free online. You just have to make sure you give credit to the artist whenever you post, or you do a video demo like I'm doing today. So once you have that, you download it, you bring it in to Photoshop by either opening up your Finder file, or sorry, your Finder icon, and dragging the file into here, or just going to File, Open, Photoshop. And you could always drag, if it goes right up here, sometimes it does that automatically. You can always drag that out, and then go to your selection tool and just drag it into this piece from that separate window. But anyway, for the most part, you guys know how to do that. So very simply, in order to get my drawing on this background without seeing any white, so that it looks like I drew it on parchment, you make sure that the parchment layer, which I just selected, is on top of your drawing. And it's because we're using a blending mode right now. And in a bit I'm going to show you what it looks like. But that's the whole point of this demo. So in blending modes, you need to have at least 2 layers. And they're called blending modes because you're blending one layer with the other. The layer on the top with the layer on the bottom. That's simply why they're called blending modes. And your blending modes will be here. You have all sorts of different blending modes. We're going to start with multiply, and then I'll start talking about other blending modes like darken and lighten and all those. But I'm going to choose for this one multiply, and you'll see that none of the white is there, and the drawing looks like you were drawn on this parchment. Like that was the original that was later scanned in, the original paper that I used. So this looks pretty good. This is something that I might put in the book as like a spot illustration or something like that. The original is a painting. But what I want to do now is, you guys might not like the color of the graphite, or the grayness. You might want to select something different. So what you want to do is, in that case, go to Image, and then go to Adjustments, and select Color Balance. So Image, Adjustments, Color Balance. And that will allow you to change the colors of the drawing. So what you need to do, so that you don't screw up the parchment or anything, is make sure the background is selected, or the layer with the drawing is selected when you go to Image, Adjustments, Color Balance. This way you're changing only the color of the drawing and the line work and the little bit of rendering there. So what I can do is I can play around with the different colors here in the color balance and change the color of the drawing itself on top of this parchment paper. I want it to be a little more brown, so what I'm going to do is add some red, a little bit of green, so that's sort of like an umbrish brown, which is my favorite. Then maybe a little yellow. So now it's nice, like brown. It looks like it was done back in the Renaissance times with a little brown piece of chalk or something like that. So then I hit OK, and then I have my piece. So that's how you use that first blending mode, multiply. You can do all sorts of things with multiply. This can be a crinkled paper, it can be another type of parchment, or it can be tea-stained paper. So you can instantly add an effect to your drawing, and you can make your drawing look like it was drawn on some more interesting looking paper, or old world paper, something like that, like parchment, which was actually animal hide. So the next part of the demo, as we move on here, is going to be about screen mode and screen blending mode. Now screen is interesting because if you have, let me bring up the little smoke image here. If you have an image of something like smoke, then you can easily, with screen blending mode, I'll show you in a bit, add it to this scene as some sort of smoke or poisonous gas or whatever, or some magic effects coming out of this castle corridor. So you got to make sure though that you find an image like this, which I also downloaded for free, with a black background. And that's the key to using screen mode. The reason I'm using screen mode and not just going in there and trying to erase everything and getting rid of it, or using the selection tool, is because with screen mode you can actually get rid of the black in the background, and then you can get rid of all the black so that only the smoke remains. So where I might put it is probably right here, coming out of that little corridor. And sometimes you can just use lower opacity to figure out where you want to put it, but I'm going to put it right there, so it's just covering this wall, because I'm going to come back in and erase it just so it looks more like it's coming out. Now what I can do is select the screen mode, but I always want to make sure that the layer with the smoke is on top. The layer with the effect that you want to appear is usually on top, like the parchment paper. The drawing was on the bottom in the previous part of the demo. The parchment paper was on top. In this part of the demo, the background, like the drawing in the other part of the demo, is my photo, is my background photo. But the important part of it, again, is on top, just like the parchment. And the important part of this piece is the smoke. So the smoke is going to blend with the background. And I'll show you. You click on this little window with the blending modes and you select screen. So now we got a little bit of smoke there. We can bring up the opacity. And we've gotten rid of all the dark, all the black background. What I could do is go in there and just sort of touch it up. One way to touch it up is with the eraser tool. In a bit I'm going to go into the blending mode options and show you how to make it even look better. So I just want to make sure I erase the little bit of smoke that was on the side of this little wall here, the cylindrical wall. And you can do this in several ways. You can select this entire wall and you can silhouette it by just filling in the shape, or you can use the free selection tool, the lasso tool, and select the entire object and copy it and put it over the smoke. But anyway, I just wanted to use the eraser because it was faster. So now you'll see that the smoke looks like it's coming out. It's coming out of that little corridor there. And what you can also do is you can move over to image again, adjustments, color balance, make sure the smoke is selected, and you can change the color of the smoke to make it look a little more like, maybe like a cloud of noxious gas or poisonous gas or something like that. And to clean things up, you can always select the eraser tool over here to clean this part up with a soft round brush. And just make sure the opacity is really low, so you're just erasing a little bit, and you can start getting rid of, that's a little too low, you can start getting rid of some of this smoke that's just cut off because of the reference photo or the image that I downloaded. So now, you could use that in other parts of the piece just to push things back and to make the smoke look like it's further in there, and you don't want to go too crazy with it. But it does make the smoke look a little more ethereal and more well integrated into the piece. And you see now that I've erased a little bit of the edges that it looks a lot more like it's coming out of that corridor. It looks a lot more like it's part of the piece behind this background image. So anyway, that's how you would use screen mode to get some smoke in there. And that's a really, really easy way also to just isolate a part of your digital painting. Maybe you've done an entire piece digitally with the paintbrush in Photoshop. It's a very easy way, if you know that the black will disappear, to isolate a lighter object on a darker background. Just go to that layer and select screen mode, and screen mode will take out the dark and isolate your object so you can work on it. So that's about it for screen mode, blending and everything. But I want to show you one more thing, actually, the blending options, which allow you to further manipulate this smoke so it even looks more like it's part of the scene. And what you can do is you can play around with these blending bars, and you can see the image behind. You see how these blending bars are taking out some of those lighter values. It's because I'm pulling the slider on the lighter side of the bar. If I pull the slide, sorry, there you go. If I pull this slider, we take out some of those grays and darks, and we can sort of dissolve this object. The underlying layer, that sort of brings up some textures and things that you might want in the background, but it might not look smooth. So what you want to do, in order to make this look smoother, either on this bar or the underlying layer bar, is hold Alt and click, and you'll see that this little Hershey Kiss shape has split into two. Now what I can do is control how much I'm dissolving there and how smooth it's going to look as it's dissolving away. You can make some really, really interesting textures and add textures with photo bashing this way. So that's what will happen down there. And then if you Alt click on the little shape there, little Hershey Kiss shape, you'll see that it's a very smooth transition now, and I'm taking out even more of the smoke. So it looks even more integrated in the scene. And finally here, Alt, hold down Alt and click, and you'll see that that's a lot smoother than it was when I first showed you. But for something like this, you're not going to want to take out the lights. You're going to mostly deal with this layer and underlying layer taking out the darks. So that's a little bit of the screen mode. Pretty much all of this section is taking out the dark. All of this section is meant to take out the light. So we're going to talk mostly about screen, but if you want to take the white part out of an image or part of your piece, you just go down to overlay, which is the strongest, and soft light if you want it to be a little softer, and you'll take out the white, just like we took out the black with screen. If screen removes the black, these remove the white or the light values. If you're dealing with something like a polar bear in snow, or an airplane behind these bright white clouds or something like that. So what I'm going to do now is show you some more blending modes and options by first just painting a little shape on here. You want to make sure your shape is not painted onto some layer that has paint on the background. Like this has white paint on the background. You don't want black or white or whatever. You want this kind of layer, which you see has a checkerboard pattern. that means it's just, an open layer. It doesn't have a background, doesn't have any paint on it. Whatever you painted there, like maybe just a little circular shape or something, or we can even put in an ellipse and then fill it in. That is just going to be this freestanding shape that's floating in space. So you don't want it on layer 1. And my point is, now we can take this shape and make it look more three-dimensional. We can add a stroke to it like you would in Illustrator. But let's just deselect it for now. And let me show you how to do it. So we'll go back into blending options, which is the same window we used for the previous part, the smoke demonstration, where we saw this, the little Aerogigas that we split. But this is different. This is a different process that involves beveling and embossing. So when you move down to Bevel and Emboss and you click on Bevel and Emboss, you'll see a little check mark, and you'll see that this shape that you've just drawn in becomes a form. It becomes three-dimensional almost. Or at least it looks three-dimensional on the screen in the program. Then you click on Bevel and Emboss, the words, the letters of Bevel and Emboss, after clicking on the checkbox, and you'll see that this other window opens up that's different from the blending options window. So you go to that other window, and there are all sorts of little sliders and things that you can change. You can change the contours, you can change the angle of the light, as you see there. And you can change the contour, the shape of the sides. You can change the size of the actual bevel itself. Let's go back to regular mode here. And it's a little easier to see this when you click on texture. So I just clicked on texture. Let's go back to Bevel and Emboss. Now you can see that the size changes. You can bevel it all the way up to something that looks almost like a circle. You can even soften it a little bit to make it look like it's further away, or if you don't want such a hard edge on all your textures. So let's just leave it right about there. And we can change the depth of your textures and the shadows to make it look really, really three-dimensional and visceral. And we can change the opacity of the shadows as well. You can make them very, very dark and high contrast, or they can be really just subtle, faint shadows. You can also play around with the contour of the bevel, or the terminator, if you will. But it's not as important as beveling and embossing and the texture, if you're interested in using a texture. Now I have all sorts of strokes on here because I use this for lettering, for embossing lettering and things like that. But if you click on stroke, you add a stroke to it, and you can, just like in Illustrator, it's very similar to the process in Illustrator, where you can change the stroke with a slider, and you can change the opacity of the stroke. You can change the position, it can be inside, outside, or in the center. We're going to keep it outside. You can change the color. There's many, many ways you can manipulate this object and change it. Let's just make it like a red here. So now we have a different stroke. Maybe we want, let's go down here, to add, let's say, a shadow. So if we add a drop shadow, we can change the distance of that drop shadow, and we can make the object look more and more like it's three-dimensional. We can change the spread, the size, and the softness of the shadow. You can even add a little bit of noise if you like. depending on the surface texture of the ground plane or something like that. So that's all great for shapes and things and forms, but what you can also do is, I'm going to click OK, add a little bit of text in there, and I'm going to click on this little icon that looks like a file folder so I can change the text around. I'm going to change the text size to, let's choose Helvetica, and I'll change the text size to, let's say, 48, or maybe 72 because it's easier to see. And then what we can do is change the color of the text. Let's just make it like a darker green this time. And I'm going to type in text, and I'm going to make it bold by highlighting the text and click the checkbox, and that's its own layer. When you type anything in Photoshop, as you know, it automatically makes its own layer. So what we can do is we can transform that layer, just make it a little bigger so you can see what's going on here. And then we can go to, again, blending options, and we're going to click on the same thing we did first, Bevel and Emboss. Change the depth, the size, a little bit there. We don't need to soften it. We can change the light and the opacity. And now you see that the text looks more three-dimensional. We can do all the same things. So we can add that nice drop shadow in there. We can unlink it with layer or link it with the layer. And then we can go back and change other things in the layer. So anyway, that's a technique that enables you to manipulate shapes and make them look more three-dimensional, and add things like shadows and strokes and textures, beveling, embossing, even making three-dimensional looking shapes out of forms, out of shapes. So that's pretty much it for the blending mode demo. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I'll just show you these other photos to review what we did. And I'll be sure to answer them as quickly as possible. So thanks again, and I will catch you next time.